What if I told you that a tiny Central American country with a GDP smaller than the city of Baltimore just pulled off one of the most audacious financial experiments in modern history? And that it worked. Not perfectly, not without pain, but it worked in ways that 70 years of international aid, World Bank loans, and IMF programs completely failed to deliver. Sounds impossible, right? Here's what shocked me. El Salvador has been receiving foreign aid since the 1950s, billions of dollars, generations of well-dressed economists flying in with briefcases full of solutions. And yet, in 2021, over 70% of Salvadorans still had no bank account, no savings account, no credit, no financial identity whatsoever. They were invisible to the global financial system. Then, one man made one radical decision, and in less than 4 years, the conversation completely changed. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal is going to fundamentally challenge everything you think you know about money, development, and what Bitcoin actually does in the real world. This isn't hype, this is history, and it directly affects your financial future. The aid trap nobody talks about. Let's start with the brutal truth that development economists don't love to say out loud. Foreign aid, in most cases, doesn't build financial independence. It builds financial dependency. And El Salvador is one of the most textbook examples of this cycle playing out in real time. Since the 1950s, El Salvador has received somewhere in the region of tens of billions of dollars in combined U.S. aid, World Bank financing, and IMF structural adjustment loans. Now, I want you to really sit with that number. We're talking about multiple generations of funding. And yet, heading into 2021, the country had one of the highest rates of financial exclusion in the entire Western Hemisphere. Nearly 3/4 of the population, working adults, small business owners, market vendors, farmers, had zero formal banking access. Zero. Why? Because traditional banking infrastructure is expensive to build. It requires physical branches, regulatory compliance, credit history systems, ID verification. For a country still recovering from a brutal civil war that ended in 1992, building that from scratch was an enormous mountain to climb. And all those aid dollars? A huge portion went to government programs, infrastructure contracts, and administrative overhead, not directly into the hands of everyday Salvadorans in a way that gave them financial agency. Let me introduce you to Carlos. I'm going to call him Carlos because, honestly, every story like this needs a Carlos. He's a fisherman in La Libertad, gets up at 4 a.m., hauls nets, sells his catch at the market, comes home smelling like the ocean and hard work. For decades, Carlos had no bank account, not because he was irresponsible, not because he didn't want one, because the nearest bank branch was an hour away, required documents he didn't have, and would have laughed him out the door for not having a credit history. So Carlos kept his savings in a tin can under his bed. Literally, a tin can. Generations of international economists flew over his village in business class, writing reports about financial inclusion, and Carlos still had a tin can. Here's the analogy I want you to hold on to. Imagine someone keeps buying you fishing rods, but you live in a landlocked desert. That's traditional banking infrastructure, empowering and uplifting with a steady, reassuring voice. That's traditional banking infrastructure for a population that has no phones, no addresses, no credit history. The tool doesn't match the problem. But here's where the story turns. In June 2021, President Nayib Bukele did something that made every central banker on the planet choke on their morning coffee. He signed the Bitcoin law, making El Salvador the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, not as a pilot program, not as an experiment, as official national currency, sitting right alongside the US dollar. The IMF immediately issued warnings. The World Bank clutched its pearls so hard you could hear them rattling from Washington, D.C. Financial media declared it reckless. But something else happened too, something the headlines buried. But wait, there's something even more surprising about what actually happened on the ground. Section 2. What Bitcoin actually did that aid never could. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the story of Bitcoin in El Salvador isn't really a story about Bitcoin price. I know that's what most YouTube channels want to make it about. El Salvador is up, El Salvador is down, the IMF said this, Bukele said that. That's noise. The real story is about financial inclusion at a level that no aid program achieved in 7 decades. When the government launched the Chivo wallet, a digital Bitcoin and dollar wallet accessible via smartphone, they did something radical. They gave every Salvadoran citizen a $30 Bitcoin bonus just for signing up. Now, yes, there were technical glitches, yes, there were critics, and honestly, some of those criticisms were fair. But here's the number that cuts through all of that. Within 30 days of launch, 3 million Salvadorans had downloaded the Chivo wallet. That's roughly 46% of the entire population. For context, that adoption rate happened faster than online banking adoption in the United States. Remember Carlos, our fisherman? He downloaded the Chivo wallet on a second-hand Android phone his daughter helped him set up. No bank visit, no credit check, no hour-long bus ride. He was in the financial system for the first time in his life, standing in his own kitchen, still smelling like fish. The tin can under the bed? Retired. That's not a policy outcome. That's a human story. And it happened millions of times across the country in a single month. Let me repeat that. A country with 70% financial exclusion achieved wider digital financial adoption in 1 month than most developed nations managed in years. No new bank branches, no international consultants, no multi-billion-dollar infrastructure loan. Just a smartphone and a digital wallet. Now, let's talk about the remittance angle, because this is where it gets truly powerful. El Salvador's economy runs on remittances. Salvadorans living abroad, primarily in the United States, send money home to their families. In 2024, remittances accounted for approximately 24% of El Salvador's entire GDP. 24%? That's not a rounding error. That is the lifeblood of millions of Salvadoran households. But here's the dirty secret of international money transfers: the fees. Before Bitcoin, sending money from the US to El Salvador through traditional wire services could cost anywhere from 5% to 10% per transaction. You send your family $200, they receive $180 or less. Multiply that across millions of transactions per year, and you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in fees being siphoned out of one of the poorest economies in the Western Hemisphere. Every single year. Carlos's son works construction in Houston. Every month, he used to send $300 home, and by the time Western Union took its cut, Carlos's wife was receiving maybe $270. That missing $30, that's a week of groceries. Gone. Vanished into the fee machine. Carlos used to joke that the wire transfer company ate better than his family did. It wasn't really a joke. Bitcoin changed that equation. Bitcoin Lightning Network transactions can move money internationally for fractions of a cent. Fractions of a cent. That means a worker in Los Angeles can send $200 to their grandmother in San Salvador, and she receives $199.99. That's not a small upgrade. For families living on tight margins, that difference is groceries. That's school supplies. That's medicine. Carlos's son now sends the full $300, and the full $300 arrives. The fee machine is hungry and angry, but it's eating someone else's lunch now. By 2025, Bitcoin-based remittance flows into El Salvador had grown substantially, with multiple corridor services reporting significant fee reductions for end users. And here's the 2026 data point that matters. The World Bank's Financial Inclusion Index for El Salvador showed meaningful improvement in the percentage of adults with access to formal financial services compared to the pre-Bitcoin baseline. That's not marketing copy, that's measurable, independent data. But that's not the crazy part, because while all this was happening at ground level, El Salvador was also playing a completely different game on the global financial stage. Here's actionable intelligence for you, and this is where I need you to pay close attention, because understanding what El Salvador did at the sovereign level is directly applicable to your own personal financial strategy. El Salvador began accumulating Bitcoin as a national reserve asset. Under Bukele's direction, the government has been purchasing Bitcoin consistently, what the crypto community calls stacking sats, and holding it in a national treasury. As of early 2026, El Salvador's Bitcoin holdings have appreciated substantially from their acquisition cost. Bitcoin is trading in a range that puts El Salvador's treasury position solidly in profit territory, even accounting for all the volatility years in between. And let me paint you a picture of what this looked like behind closed doors, because it is genuinely one of the most entertaining geopolitical standoffs of the last decade. On one side, Nayib Bukele, a 40-something president who posts memes, called himself the world's coolest dictator on Twitter as a joke and decided to put Bitcoin on his country's balance sheet. On the other side, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, institutions staffed by thousands of Ivy League economists who have been managing developing country debt since before Bukele was born. They sent letters, they issued statements, they scheduled urgent calls, they dispatched delegations. Bukele essentially responded with the institutional equivalent of, "Thanks, noted, buying more Bitcoin." The establishment was furious, and honestly, a little baffled. You could almost hear them asking each other in the hallways, "Can he just do that?" Turns out, yes, he could. Now, why does this matter to you? Because what El Salvador did at a national scale is exactly what individual wealth builders should be doing at a personal scale. And here are your 3 actionable takeaways right now. Actionable tip number 1. Treat Bitcoin as a reserve asset, not a trading asset. El Salvador didn't buy Bitcoin to flip it next week. They bought it and held it through brutal drawdowns. Through the 2022 crypto winter, when Bitcoin dropped over 70% from its high. Through the FTX collapse. Through the media declaring Bitcoin dead for the 500th time. They held. And by 2026, that disciplined holding strategy has positioned their treasury ahead. The lesson for your portfolio? If you're going to hold Bitcoin, hold it with a multi-year mindset. Buy with money you don't need in the next 2 to 3 years. Dollar cost average, meaning buy a fixed amount regularly, regardless of price. And stop looking at the daily chart like it owes you something. Actionable tip number 2. Use Bitcoin's infrastructure to reduce your own financial friction costs. Most people in developed countries don't think about financial friction because their banking works reasonably well. But you are losing money to fees right now and not tracking it. Wire transfer fees, international transaction fees, currency conversion markups, high interest debt that erodes your real net worth daily. Bitcoin's Lightning Network is available to you right now. Apps like Strike, empowering and uplifting with a steady, reassuring voice. Apps like Strike and others allow you to send and receive money globally at near zero cost. Even if you never invest a single dollar in Bitcoin as an asset, the rails, the payment infrastructure, can save you real money today. Start there. Actionable tip number 3, understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. This is critical, and I see beginners get this wrong constantly. El Salvador didn't bet on Dogecoin. They didn't put the national treasury into some new altcoin project with a dog mascot. They chose Bitcoin specifically, the asset with the longest track record, the most decentralized network, the fixed supply of 21 million coins, and the strongest security architecture in the entire digital asset space. When you hear crypto, that umbrella covers thousands of projects, most of which will go to zero. Bitcoin is not crypto in the same way that gold is not a random rock. Know the difference before you put a single dollar anywhere. Now here's where it gets interesting, because no honest conversation about El Salvador's Bitcoin journey is complete without looking at the risks and the red flags, and I'm not going to skip that part. This is your fraud alert, empowering and uplifting with a steady, reassuring voice. The fraud alert, what El Salvador got wrong and what to watch for. This is your fraud alert segment, and I need you to stay sharp. El Salvador's Bitcoin experiment is not a fairy tale. There were real problems. The Chivo wallet had significant technical failures at launch. There were reports of identity theft, bad actors creating fraudulent accounts using other people's national ID numbers to steal the $30 Bitcoin sign-up bonus. Thousands of Salvadorans reported unauthorized accounts opened in their names. That is not a small issue. That is a direct attack on the most financially vulnerable people in the country, using the very tool that was supposed to help them. Even Carlos, remember Carlos, had a neighbor who had a fake Chivo account opened in his name before he even knew what Bitcoin was. The scammers moved faster than the government's rollout team. That's almost impressive in a deeply depressing way. And here's the broader scam pattern you need to recognize, because it's being replicated right now in 2026 across dozens of countries and platforms. Whenever a new financial tool gets introduced to an unbanked or underbanked population, scammers show up first. They know that people with no financial literacy, no safety net, and desperate need for a solution are the perfect target. In 2026, we're seeing this play out with fake Bitcoin wallet apps, fraudulent Bitcoin adoption assistance schemes targeting immigrants, and phishing attacks disguised as government benefit programs in emerging markets. The rule is simple, and I want you to tattoo it on your brain. No legitimate Bitcoin system will ever ask you to send Bitcoin to receive Bitcoin. No government Bitcoin program requires you to verify your wallet by sending funds. No real exchange will DM you on social media with a special opportunity. If someone contacts you unsolicited about a Bitcoin opportunity, that is a scam. Full stop. Protect your assets like El Salvador should have better protected its citizens at launch. The bigger structural risk to acknowledge, El Salvador's relationship with the IMF was significantly strained by the Bitcoin law. And here's where that boardroom showdown we mentioned earlier came to its first major plot twist. In early 2025, El Salvador reached a deal with the IMF for a $1 billion. $4 billion loan, empowering and uplifting with a steady, reassuring voice. $4 billion loan, and part of the agreement involved making Bitcoin acceptance voluntary for merchants rather than mandatory. The IMF got its concession. Bukele got his loan. Both sides declared a kind of grim, tight-lipped victory. What does that tell you? It tells you that sovereign Bitcoin adoption at a national level faces enormous institutional resistance. The traditional financial system does not surrender its influence quietly. It negotiates, it pressures, and it plays the long game. This is not a reason to avoid Bitcoin. It's a reason to understand the political and institutional landscape that surrounds it, and to make your own decisions with clear eyes, not blind enthusiasm. So let's bring this home. 3 things I want you to walk away with today. First, Bitcoin did what decades of aid couldn't. It gave millions of people, including a fisherman named Carlos with a tin can under his bed, direct financial access through technology, not bureaucracy.
That's a real, documented result, not hype. Second, the tools Bitcoin creates, low-cost transfers, self-custody wallets, borderless transactions, are available to you right now, regardless of whether you invest a single dollar. Third, stay sharp on the scams.
New financial tools, empowering and uplifting with a steady, reassuring voice. New financial tools attract predators. Knowledge is your best defense. Now, here's the question I genuinely want your take on. Do you think Bitcoin is a tool for economic freedom, or is it just being used as a political tool by governments looking for attention? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this video gave you even one thing you didn't know before, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a wise money breakdown. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay free.